Since President Trump did ascend to the Oval Office, one question has dogged him from the beginning, and that is he a racist? The president strongly denies it, saying that he is, in fact, the least racist person. But opponents would argue that history tells a different story, going all the way back to the firestorm he ignited around the rape of a female jogger in New York Central Park. That was in 1989. The now infamous case saw 5 young Black and Latino teenagers falsely accused and jailed for the crime. And then businessman Trump took out a full-page newspaper ad to bring back the death penalty. Director and writer Ava DuVernay has delved deeply into racism and civil rights with her Oscar-nominated film Selma and her documentary 13th. And now she's taking on the story of the so-called Central Park 5 in her new Netflix series. It's called When They See Us, and it aims to get the viewer to relive the injustice and humanize those falsely accused. The first episode in this series really doesn't happen in court. It doesn't happen in Central Park. It's in their homes, right? You are making us see them as people and as one reviewer said, the innocence that they once were and the innocence that they lost and the innocence they still always insisted on.
That's true. That's true. We begin on a spring day. It was April 19th, 1989, when these 5 boys, Black and brown boys, were kind of ripped out of their youth. And it was the last day that they were ever boys, the last day that they were ever kids. And so we start on this day, and you just see boys being boys, and you know, talking to their families, talking to their friends, and then a horrible tragedy befalls them. You know, there were 6 victims that day. It was Trisha Miley, who was the woman who was raped and assaulted viciously by someone who was not properly pursued. And then you had these 5 boys who there was never any DNA evidence connecting them to the crime. There was never a weapon. There was never any physical evidence. All that the prosecutors had were these coerced statements. And so in the film, we show how those statements came to be. You'll go through and you'll witness the interrogations of each of the men as they describe them, as they remember them. There was physical harm. There was emotional intimidation, and certainly the absence of an adult in most of the rooms. There you also see a boy whose parents were in the room and how the parents were intimidated. You were dealing with people who did not have a full scope of what their rights were at the time and who trusted the police to process the matter professionally and ethically, and that didn't happen. And so we get to a place where we're looking at a case that is tried. Boys are sent away for crimes that they didn't commit, for crimes that there was no physical evidence for, and who served really tough time. Corey Wise spent almost 14 years in prison. He went directly to Rikers Island at the age of 16 and endured troubling, terrorizing behavior within those while in the custody of the state of New York City is really what it was, New York State. So it's a story that really allows us to look at, yes, this case, but also the overall system that is called criminal justice and how unjust it actually is.
Well, I mean, the system that many critics and people who are delving into it now, including in books and other things, call, you know, this is the second victimization and almost the conspiracy to scapegoat Black and Latino people of color, boys of color, in an overzealous prosecutorial environment. Is that what you're also trying to get at? I mean, of course, these prosecutors who we know had to, or felt that they had to be massively tough on crime in order to pursue, for instance, political careers.
Sure. I mean, a lot of people talk about the system being broken, but I don't believe the system is broken. I believe it's working exactly as it was built to work. In a documentary that I made called 13th, I deconstruct how this system came to be, the historical context of a criminal justice system that over-indexes on the criminalization of people of color in the United States. And so it's one thing to say it's broken, but when you really delve into it, you see it's working exactly as it was made to work. And it's important for forward-thinking people who actually care about true justice to analyze this, to understand how it was built, what the context for it is in the past and now, to work to dismantle it in the future. It really can't be reformed. It has to be completely overhauled. And we're hoping that people watch this very famous case and begin to become emotional and connected to the idea that we need massive work to reframe the way that we think about criminality in the United States.
And I want to, I'm going to get to a clip that you actually have in your film, and it's Donald Trump talking about being a young black person, or what a young black person goes through. But first, I want to put it in this context, because the Democrats and others are sort of competing over criminal justice reform. As I said, it used to be considered cool to be really tough on crime, and that's how you get ahead. And now, all these years later, is about criminal justice reform, to the point that President Trump himself holds himself up as going for that. And he is tweeting against Joe Biden. Super predator was the term associated with the 1994 crime bill that sleepy Joe Biden was so heavily involved in passing. That was a dark period in American history, but has Sleepy Joe apologized? No. And then the president goes on to say that anyone associated with that bill would not have a chance of being elected. In particular, African Americans won't be able to vote for you. I, on the other hand, am responsible for criminal justice reform. It's very interesting that he's trying to appeal now to this vote. Will that work?
No, because forward-thinking people, particularly Black people who were victimized by that bill, and brown people, clearly recall that in 1989, 5 years before that bill, Donald Trump and his rhetoric was directly responsible for the atmosphere that made that bill possible to even pass, to even propose. In 1989, Donald Trump took out $85,000 in ads, at that time an exorbitant amount of money now, took out ads in the New York City newspapers calling for the execution of these 5 boys, calling for the execution of minors who at that point had not even gone to trial. It was only 2 weeks after the crime had happened. So with no due process, with no recognition of their humanity, with no value of our constitutional right to be innocent before guilty, he called for the death of these kids. And so with that kind of rhetoric that actually had real-world impact, that contributed to an air of criminality, of bias, of terror, of the pointing to Black and brown boys and girls as animals, as a wolf pack, the dehumanization of Black people at that time, all of this tweeting, all of this nonsense is a smokescreen to the actual real-world impact his racist, white supremacist views, his opportunistic buffoonery had at that time. So when I look at that tweet and I look at the 94 crime bill, and you really know your history, you understand the atmosphere that was created within, the atmosphere in which that bill was passed, was an atmosphere that Donald Trump actively contributed to.
Well, yes. I mean, I remember covering that case. Clearly, the media did not cover itself in glory covering that case. But one of the things that I do remember, because I saw my own stand-up, basically saying that at that time, a recent Gallup poll had showed that a full 76% of New York City residents favor executing some convicted criminals. So it was at a time when New York City was already in a heightened state of favoring the death penalty. But you include an interview with President Trump at the time, based on, not based on this case, in your documentary. I'm going to play the clip, and then I'm going to ask you why you decided to put that in.
If I were starting off today, I would love to be a well-educated Black, because I really believe they do have an actual advantage today.
Very prominent in New York.
What is a Black?
I don't know. But hell, maybe he's right. Sometimes you gotta ask yourself, when is the white man gonna get a break in this country?
Girl, don't make me laugh.
We need to keep that bigot off TV is what they need to do. Don't worry about it. It's 15 minutes almost up.
Why did you feel that you had to include that?
Well, Donald Trump's ads and the atmosphere that he was creating and conjuring and contributing to at the time is a part of the story, but a small part of the story. Certainly, there was a world in which I actually cast an actor and had scenes that were centering Donald Trump. When most people think about the Central Park 5 case before they watch this film, they associate him with Trump's ad, the ad when he called for the death of the boys. For me, the priority for this piece was the voice of the boys, not the voice of Donald Trump or the voice of people who were opposing them. And so we were very judicious in choosing just a couple of moments. You have that moment. You have another moment where you see the actual ad as a mother of one of the boys encounters the newspaper in a local bodega and how that felt to her. And those were just a couple of moments that we put into a piece that's over 5 hours long to really make sure that that's not forgotten, but certainly not the emphasis for us